Hi everyone, I'm Lizzy Norman Sargent. For those of you who don't know me, I am SCM's Faith in Action social justice project worker, and I'm here today in my teeny tiny kitchen to lead you all in SCM's very first virtual cook-along. Now the purpose of this cook-along is twofold. The first is it's going to provide you with an opportunity to try out one of the recipes that's going to be in our Ethical Cookbook, which we're launching later in the year. Now, if you haven't submitted your own recipe yet for our Ethical Cookbook, please do, because we'd love to include it. The second reason we're doing a cook-along right now is because we want to tie it into Holocaust Memorial Day. And the reason we're doing a cook-along for Holocaust Memorial Day is because it's one of the things that the Holocaust Memorial Trust actually recommends that you do as a way of marking genocide and remembrance for the Holocaust. So they talk about the fact that cooking together is a really engaging way of learning about other cultures and celebrating the lives of people who were murdered during genocide. And we thought it would be a really good idea to tie this with our Ethical Cookbook because it gives you a chance to think about the ethics of food beyond thinking about how we source produce, which is obviously a really important part of thinking ethically about food. But actually there's a whole other side where food is used in a different ethical way as a way to bring people together, to break down barriers, and to get to know other people and other cultures. So for today's recipe, we're going to be making Čupavci, which is a type of Bosnian cake. Čupavci in English translates as hurry, and it's affectionately known as Bosnian hurry cake. But what it actually is a type of coconut cake. It is vegetarian, but unfortunately it's not vegan, the recipe, so I apologise for that. The reason why I chose a Bosnian recipe to share with you all is because this recipe actually means quite a lot to me. So in 2015, I went to Bosnia on an educational exchange with an organisation called Remembering Srebenica. And the purpose of this trip was to go and learn about the genocide that occurred at Srebrenica in Bosnia in 1995. This genocide resulted in the deaths of 8,372 mainly Bosnian men and boys. The youngest victim was a two-day-old baby. The purpose of the trip was we went and met the mothers of Srebrenica, who are these amazing women who have spent the whole time since 1995 searching for answers for their children, searching for the remains of their loved ones. And it's kind of an experience I can't really do justice to over a video like this or even just talking about it. When I came back to the UK, I started working voluntarily on the West Midlands board for Remembering Srebenica, which I've been on since 2017. And one of the main things that I do, I would organise the peace walks in Birmingham, which took place to coincide with Srebrenica Memorial Day in July. And this would involve going to different faith establishments and hearing about their faith and talking about the importance of interfaith in tackling hate crimes, both on the wider scale internationally, but also within our own communities. And then we would always end at the Bosnian Cultural Centre in Birmingham. And all these amazing Bosnian women would make the most tremendous food for us. And thank us all for going on this nice walk around Birmingham and hearing all these amazing stories from these different faith institutions. These amazing women would make the most amazing food for us for the end. And one of the things that they would make would be Čupavci, and I really love it. I love coconut. So I really love the cake, but I also really love the memories it brings whenever I eat it of these amazing, hospitable, welcoming people who have the biggest heart. So it was a real pleasure to learn how to make it myself. I've adapted the recipe slightly from how some Bosnians might make it, so I can't say it's a true representation of the culture, but people have different ways of making it as well. So I recognise the fact that it might be slightly different to how some Bosnians would make it. But yeah, this is my version, and it's a real honour to make it in behalf of these ladies. So you're going to need 300 grams of plain flour. I have used British Source flour to try and make it that bit more ethical in terms of miles. You're then going to need 50 grams of butter. My butter is organic, again, just to try and make it that bit more ethical. You then need 2 large eggs. I've used free range. Don't know if you can see that very well. I apologise if not. You're then going to need 250 grams of granulated sugar. I've gone for fair trade sugar. There it is. And then you'll need 1.5 tablespoons of vanilla essence, which I have not yet added in. Again, I've used fair trade vanilla essence. You're going to need 1 tablespoon of baking powder, and then 150 millilitres of milk. And again, I went for organic milk just to try and make it that bit more ethical. I think it's important to note that these are just the ingredients for the cake mix. We have different ingredients we'll use in a little bit when we make the topping for the cake, which is a chocolate topping, and then we roll it in coconut. But I'll go through that in a little bit when we come to do that. But to start with, we're just going to make the cake. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take our 50 grams of butter and then heat it up on the stove. So essentially, we're going to melt it. Now, technically, you don't need to use melted butter. You could always use oil in replace of butter. I know that some recipes that you would follow for this would do that. It's just not something that I've ever done. I've always used butter. So one of the things that has always stayed with me about going to Bosnia with Remembering Srebenica is on the first day we went to a museum in Sarajevo where they have pictures of all the people who perished in the genocide, all the people who were killed, which in itself was really harrowing. But within the museum there's also a video kind of depicting what happened and talking about the fact that Srebrenica was supposed to be the first UN safe zone. So the UN had told the Bosnian people if they went there and gave up their weapons, they would be safe from the Serbian military, which didn't end up happening. Actually, what happened, much more horrific than that. Essentially, this was Bosnian people being cornered, having given up their weapons, and the UN just being overrun. But as part of that video, kind of, they had images of people who had come to the UN safe zone in Srebrenica, and within that was a boy who would have been on the cusp of the age at which they were separated for genocide. So it was mainly boys who were of fighting age who were separated. My butter's melted there, so I'm just going to take it off the pan for a second while I finish speaking to you. So yeah, he would have been about the cusp, about 13, I think, and he was holding in his hands his pet rabbit, so this white rabbit. It wasn't in a cage or anything, it was just in his hands, free. And that just really stuck with me because it was just this question, like this boy who obviously loved his pet so much he brought it with him while escaping unimaginable horror, and also this sense that he almost thought that perhaps life would go back to normal quite soon and he would be able to look after his rabbit and then take it back home with him. And it's just little things like that where, yeah, it just really stayed with me. Like the idea of who was this boy. I mean, I still don't know to this day what happened to him, what happened to his pet rabbit, what about his family. So stories like that kind of things that just really, they play on your mind, I guess. So I'm going to bring my butter over here and put it on my cooling station just while I get ready to do the rest of the baking. So as you might be able to tell, I've moved the camera slightly so you can see what happens now. So we're going to start by adding the butter to the eggs. So that's the melted butter straight in with the eggs. And then just combining all the other ingredients together. So let me put my pan down. So I'm going to put the 300 grams of flour in with the eggs and the butter now. And then in goes the 250 grams of granulated sugar. And the recipe is quite clear, it's granulated sugar here. And then we're going to put in a 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla essence. Tablespoon and a half. And then a tablespoon of baking powder as well. And then finally in goes the 150 milligrams of milk. And then I'm just going to set my whisk up and then I'm going to whisk it all together. So really, really simple, not that difficult to do. Now, if you don't have a handheld mixer, don't worry, you can do this freehand, that's fine. Just obviously I find it a bit easier to do it with a handheld mixer. And voila, that is our cake mix. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in a baking tray now. A flat baking tray is best, a square flat one, just because we're going to cut the cake up into smaller pieces once it comes out of the oven. So I'm just going to... So the other thing that really stayed with me about going to Bosnia with Remembering Srebenica, besides the video with the boy with the white rabbit, was obviously meeting the mothers of Srebrenica themselves. These are the most remarkable women I've ever met, and I don't think I'll ever meet any other people who inspire me in quite the same way. So these women essentially since 1995 have been searching for justice for their children, and what was remarkable was the fact that despite all this suffering, they were just full of so much compassion for others. So I went during the height of the refugee crisis, and one of them was talked about the fact that if she could give up her child again, so no mother had to go through the pain of losing a child, whether that was drowning at sea because they were fleeing conflict or being killed during conflict, they would. And I just find that so remarkable, just the dignity and compassion that these women have. And when people ask me about things you've seen that you find miraculous, just the way that Bosnians have been able to lift themselves up, and the fact that they've never really retaliated for what happened to them, the way they retaliate is by seeking justice. And I think that just shows a real strength of character. And like I said, they're also the most hospitable people I think I've ever met. So welcoming, so loving. So yeah, the mothers of Srebrenica, just their strength astounds me. So what's going to happen now is I'm just going to put the cake mixture in the oven. I'll put it on at 200, and that is gas mark 6 for anybody using a gas mark oven. It's going to be in for 20 minutes. But I will check it after 10 minutes just to make sure it doesn't need turning or anything like that. Okay, so I'm just about to check on the cake. I think it's ready. If it is, I'll put it on the cooling rack. Just going to try it with a knife and make sure that all the cake mixture, yeah, that's set. So as you can see, the cake is nice and golden. I'm going to take it out of the tray. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave the cake to cool there now for about 10 minutes, and then we'll get on with making the chocolate sauce. So the cake has cooled a bit, so what I'm going to do now is just start cutting it up. It should roughly cut into about 30 pieces, so relatively small pieces. I'll show you the size once I've cut them up. So this might be a great cake to make for any of our student groups who want to share food together. One of the things I love about making food and thinking about where it comes from and telling the stories like I've done with Srebrenica is it plays into the fact that when I was in Bosnia, people talked about the fact that they obviously wanted people to know about the genocide, to talk about it, but that wasn't all they wanted. Like, they obviously, people and countries and cultures and groups of who have been impacted by such violence want to be known for other things though as well. And food's a great way of doing that. It's a great way of sharing other parts of the culture, I think. And I just think food's a great way of bringing people together as well. So if I bring a couple of pieces over and just show you kind of roughly the size that we're cutting up the cake into. I mean, obviously, feel free to cut it how you want, freestyle if you want. You know better than I do what you would prefer. This is just a bit of a guide. I'm just going to clean this up so I can get to the stove, and then we'll get on with making the chocolate sauce. Okay, so for the cake topping, what you're going to need is 200 grams of chocolate. This can be milk or dark. Some people will recommend dark, but I actually do a mixture of the two, so I put dark and milk in together. You're then going to need 200 millilitres of milk. You'll need 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar, and then 2 tablespoons of marge or butter if you don't have marge, but I would recommend marge as being better just because it helps the top set a bit more. And then you'll also need 200 grams of coconut, so you can roll your cake once it's covered in chocolate in the coconut and give it its final coating. So making the chocolate sauce is really simple. I'm just going to take that 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar that I talked about earlier and put it in with the chocolate. Then I'm going to take 2 tablespoons of marge that I talked about earlier and also put that in with the chocolate. And then I'm going to add my 200 millilitres of milk. And then I'm going to take it all over here and put it in the pan I have in the stove already, and then heat it up. Making sure the chocolate melts, but constantly stirring it to make sure it doesn't stick. What should happen is it should go really lovely, and it'll look like, if you've ever seen a Hallmark Christmas movie, they always make homemade hot chocolate in Hallmark Christmas movies, and it'll look a bit like that. And if you taste it, it'll also taste really sweet, like a really sweet hot chocolate. So as I said, it goes a little bit like you would imagine the homemade hot chocolates do in a Hallmark movie. So I'm just going to leave that just to cool slightly, and then we'll get on with rolling our cake in the chocolate and the coconut. Okay, so for this bit, what we're going to do is we're going to spear a piece of the cake with a fork, and then we're going to dip it in the chocolate. Use your spoon to make sure it's really covered, and then taking our coconut, we're going to put the coconut on the side plate and then simply roll the cake in the coconut so it becomes covered with coconut. You could try doing this with just the fork, but I find it so much better if you just get in there and use your fingers. Just make sure your hands are clean, obviously. I think that goes without saying with all baking, always make sure your hands are clean. And then put it on the cooling rack to dry, and then go again with another piece. Yeah, this is quite a messy thing to keep doing, but it's also quite therapeutic, I find. And just really make sure the cake is being covered in the coconut. It's lovely chocolatey and coconutty together. So yeah, and just keep repeating this until all the pieces of cake are covered, and then voila, you'll be done. So this is what the final product should look like. So this is our Čupavci. I'm just going to pick one up so you can see it a bit closer to the camera. So there we go, lovely chocolatey, coconutty, and I will break into one so you can see one on the inside. So there we go, that's what it looks like once broken on the inside, lovely and golden and fluffy. The cake goes really well with coffee, obviously Bosnian coffee it goes well with, but it goes well with any coffee, and I'm sure it would go lovely with tea as well. That's the end of the cook-along today. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's helped you think a bit differently about the ethics of food, so not just about where our food comes from and making sure that that is sustainable and fair for workers, but also thinking about the stories that food can tell and what that can mean for people. If you would like to know more about how you could host a cook-along or what meals you could make to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, The Holocaust Memorial Day Trust has some really good information on their website and recipes for both the Holocaust but also the other 4 genocides that have happened since. If you want to know more about Srebrenica or Remembering Srebenica, you can check out the Remembering Srebenica website or just message me directly. I'll be happy to answer any questions or to put you in touch with some Bosnians who could perhaps answer your questions if I can't. If you haven't yet submitted a recipe for our cookbook, again, I would really encourage you to do so. We're really looking forward to receiving them and adding them to the pile that we've already got. And other than that, I hope you have a fab time baking. I hope the cake turns out well. And yeah, I can't wait to read your recipes.